Da, 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 da. Dun, da-dun, da-dun, da-da-dun. Zoom. Hello, everybody. This is our review of Star Trek Strange New World Season 2, Episode 2, Ad Astra per Aspera. And I am joined, as always, by my best buddy, Jason. Hi, Jason.
Hi, everybody.
So
We
here
just
we
watched
are.
it.
We literally just watched the episode. So let's do the thing where we go over what happened in it, and then we'll do the thing after that where we talk about what we thought about it.
A whole lot of talking.
It's the trial of number one.
Episode 1 had to have all the punching and fighting in it.
Because this didn't have none of that.
Because they were afraid, oh no, if we opened with this, people will get upset.
It feels like, and I know there was one of these episodes in, I don't think the most recent season of Discovery, but maybe season 3 of Discovery, where it was a people sitting at tables talking episode.
Okay.
Which is a Star Trek staple. Like every Star Trek show has had these episodes going back to the original series, right?
Sure.
With the episode Court Martial that was clearly a touchstone for this episode. Where it's like it's the episode of the sci-fi show that takes place in space on spaceships, where the story is about people sitting at tables talking. And so the subject of the table talking this time is that number one was arrested at the end of last season, and because she's from a planet, a species that genetically engineers themselves, like as a
not
cultural
a species,
thing.
those are human beings.
Are they humans or are they?
Yes, I believe that they are human beings on a Federation colony.
Well, whatever they are, they genetically modify themselves.
Been genetically modifying themselves over a few years, from what I understand.
It's like a part of their culture. They do it, and the Federation doesn't like that, and you're not allowed to do that. And if you do that, you're not allowed to be in Starfleet.
That's right.
So she joined Starfleet anyway.
And if you lie about it, you can go to jail.
And you can go to jail for a long ass time, apparently. So she lied about it to get into Starfleet, and then.
Gee, what does that remind me of? What does that remind me of?
I don't think
if you lied about something about yourself that potentially you could lose your job and get drummed out of the military.
No, see, I think you're reaching. I don't think there's any real world.
Okay.
There's no real world relevance to any of this. But so that all happened at the end of last season as she was arrested. And then last week, Pike left Spock in charge so he could go to this planet, which apparently is the planet where, I don't know if it's the planet where Illyrians come from, but it's where a bunch of them live in this nebula. So he goes to find a lawyer, and the lawyer is someone who is an old friend of number one's, although we don't find out like the whole story until later in the episode. But so Pike goes to the lawyer's office, and he's having trouble breathing because he needs an oxygen mask and he's running out of air. And finally she takes pity on him and says,
because you need to be genetically modified in order to breathe the atmosphere.
Right. Because it's because they live in the middle of like a cloud, and normal people who haven't been genetically modified can't breathe the air.
That's right.
So eventually she says yes, and she takes the case, and Pike's like, yay, she's gonna get off and be able to come back to work. But Pike's ex-girlfriend, Captain Battelle, is the prosecutor, along with a jerk-ass Vulcan admiral.
Yeah.
And she's kind of like Riker in The Measure of a Man. I think
that's his Vulcan name, Jerkass.
Jerkass with like an apostrophe after the J.
J apostrophe RK.
Yes. Yes. Jerkass. But so Pike's ex-girlfriend, Captain Battelle, is also one of the prosecutors, and she's kind of like Riker in The Measure of a Man, where like she's on the prosecution side, but she's not like super comfortable with it. Because at one point Pike is like a little grumpy because he wasn't on the witness list, and she's like, well, if they called you as a witness, they would eventually get you to admit that you knew that number one was genetically modified before she got arrested for it.
Asking for it,
and then you'd be in trouble. And he's like, oh, okay, I guess, whatever.
This is the reason why you're not doing anything this episode.
Well, he gets to sit and watch a lot.
Yes, he does.
Anson Mount gets to practice his reactions, and he does a very good job. And so most of the story is the lawyer and number one and the courtroom stuff. And other than when they're giving testimony. Most of the other regulars are just kind of watching it on court TV from the Enterprise.
Yeah.
And so the trial goes on. And the idea is, well, hey, look, it's the law. You know, she broke the law. She comes from a place with genetic modification, and she knew that going in. So she broke the law, and that's, you know, case closed, right? And put her in jail for 20 years.
Because their original offer was, hey, we're just going to forget everything you did for Starfleet, and you can continue to be a citizen, and there's no exile involved, and
you
thumbs
get a
up,
discharge.
doesn't that sound great? And you're getting kicked out of Starfleet.
You get a discharge, but no jail time and no like repercussions other than not being able to be in Starfleet anymore.
But she doesn't accept the deal.
Right. Because as it turns out, there's another subplot that you know related to the main plot that ran for most of the episode, where it was the question of, well, how did Starfleet even find out? Because nobody knew except Captain Pike.
Yeah.
And Captain Pike didn't tell nobody.
No, he's no snitch.
He's not a snitch.
No.
And La'an is worried that maybe it was her because she didn't tell Starfleet, but she also knew about it. She found out that number one was Illyrian, and she recorded a personal log about it at the time. And she was worried that maybe somehow Starfleet got a hold of her personal log, and that's how they found out, and that's why number one's in trouble. So she's worried about that. Turns out that's not it. Nope. The mystery's solution is that number one turned herself in.
That's right.
Because she was tired of hiding, and she wanted to be able to serve in Starfleet openly as who she is, because she loves Starfleet and she believes in what Starfleet stands for.
What is that?
It doesn't have any relevance to the real world. There's no relevance to the real world.
Something, Steve. No, I just can't put my finger on it.
This is a space show about space people. It's not.
I know
it's not about real world issues.
All right. Anyway.
So her lawyer finally calls number one to the stand, and number one tells her story about how her family were Illyrians and they lived on a colony that became a Federation colony right before she was born. And after it became a Federation colony, the Federation said, "Okay, you guys, no more genetically modifying yourselves." And they were like, "We promise," but then some of them kept doing it anyway because it's how they had always lived. It was their culture. And they were like, fuck that. We're going to keep doing our thing. So eventually, and the people that were genetically modified or suspected of being genetically modified were mistreated and persecuted. And eventually they kind of split the town in half and they did segregation where, okay, you genetically modified people live over here and you non-genetically modified people, you live over here. And when that time came, Una's family, number one's family, said, okay, well, we're going to keep pretending that we're not genetically modified because we can pass, and we're going to stay in Normie Town, not in Augment Town. And the lawyer and she and her lawyer were like friends as kids. And her lawyer and her family went and lived in genetically modified side of town, and so they were no longer friends. And now like however 30 years later, now here they are back together again. So after she tells her story, her lawyer says, "I got you now." She turns to the tribunal of admirals and she says, "Okay, I found a law in the Federation law book that says that if you fear for your life and you're seeking asylum, that you can be granted asylum in Starfleet, and Starfleet captains have the power of discretion to decide who gets asylum and who doesn't."
That's right.
And the only thing that's necessary after that decision is made by a captain to make it official is for a Starfleet tribunal to certify it. So we can just forget all of this if you recognize that number one joined Starfleet because she believed in its ideals and she saw it as a place of safety and refuge for her after her terrible upbringing and persecution. And Captain Pike found out about it and decided to grant her asylum in Starfleet because this is where she came to have a place to belong and to do good. And all you have to do is find her not guilty of these charges and certify that Captain Pike granted her asylum, and that's that. And that's what they do.
That's what happens. The end.
And that's what happens. And Una comes back to work, and she and her lawyer have a nice, moment where they say goodbye. And Una is, is grateful, but is regretful that, her case didn't have more far-reaching consequences because it basically only applies to her. But the lawyer says, well, you know what? It's a start. And she leaves, and Captain Pike gives her a hug, and we both cry because Captain Pike is so awesome.
Yeah.
And then everybody gets back to work, and everything's back to normal on the good old Starship Enterprise. So
we can get back to the business of exploring the goddamn galaxy.
So that's basically what happened in the episode. What did you think of this one?
I loved it.
Yeah.
I mean, am I doing cartwheels or no? This is kind of, I don't want to say a tradition, but every single series that we've ever had has had this episode.
Yes.
Where they have taken something that's kind of fundamental to equal rights, or, whether it's something as dumb as, oh no, Jack the Ripper's ghost is on board the Enterprise and Scotty's been accused of murder. We've had the court episode. Right. Yeah. And we get a court episode, except this time, because I brought up something Steve had brought up. He did a comedy sketch about a Starfleet lawyer.
About a lawyer. Yeah, a Starfleet lawyer. Yeah.
Where this time the captain wasn't representing, there were lawyers involved.
The captain went and got a lawyer for once. Yeah, absolutely.
The Starfleet prosecution people. And then there was a defense attorney that was not part of Starfleet. And it was held in an actual courtroom, not on a spaceship,
not on the
middle of nowhere. And it was held at Starfleet headquarters. Traditionally these things are, the captain is going to now advocate for the defense.
Right.
Because, I mean, let's face facts. Worf got accused by the Klingon Empire of killing civilians. Who defended him? Not a Starfleet lawyer.
Captain Sisko. He said,
I'll do it myself. Did.
I'll do it myself.
I think the original series is the one that actually brought in a lawyer to defend Scotty.
I think before. No, I know it was Kirk when Kirk was court-martialed.
Yeah, when Kirk was court-martialed, they brought someone in, didn't they?
Did Scotty have a lawyer too?
Scotty, I think, had a lawyer as well.
I know that because, like I said, the episode court-martial is, there are a lot of references to that in this, and I know, and Kirk had a lawyer in that. That's the only other time I can remember before this. And if the Scotty one is true, then I accept that, but I can't remember that specifically. But but it's certainly the first time since the original series where we had a courtroom episode where one of the main characters was on trial, and they actually went out and got a lawyer instead of just having one of the other regulars be their lawyer, usually the captain.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things about Star Trek is that for me to enjoy Star Trek, I don't need an episode where everyone's running and punching and flying a spaceship and pew-pewing and the special effects or whatever. It's oftentimes shows like this that I like, is when they take on something and it's kind of like, if you want to see the metaphor, it's there. If you don't want to see the metaphor, it's not there. Okay. Steve has always asked this question. How is it that conservatives like Star Trek when it's obviously very liberal? And it's like, because it's very easy for you to say, well, this is just a made up thing that's happening in a made up time.
Because because they're dumb, shallow people.
Well, okay. But in this case, while I'm sitting there going, who does that remind me of? I know exactly who that reminds me of because it's there.
Of course.
Okay. And this is what Star Trek is usually pretty good at. Hey, let's take a fucked up thing from now and let's examine it on our show. And in this case, they examined it on our show without outright saying, and this is a Star Trek tradition, exactly what it is that they were talking about. Okay. And in this case, it's the augmented people are being treated as second-class citizens. They are doing things that, they have to live in secret. They can't talk about it. And that can be applicable to any number of things. They use the word "I was passing." You're passing as
Yes.
human.
Yes. So
Several
yeah,
times.
that could be immigrants. I thought of DACA. That could
Mm-hmm.
be trans people. That could be,
Yeah.
people from different religions or
Mm-hmm.
different ethnic
Mm-hmm.
backgrounds who are living in a part of the world where their
Mm-hmm.
people from their group are persecuted. Yeah, you could apply it to pretty much any situation where a minority group is being mistreated.
And so
Is
in
in a
this,
situation.
while we were doing this, I stopped it a couple of times while I was talking while we were watching it, because this was ramming against something else that I care about. Steve doesn't care about it all that much, and that's canon.
Mhm.
And another thing, how does this make Starfleet look? And you know, the way it kind of makes Starfleet look is that we got so scared after the eugenics wars that we kind of became racist, but only against people who've been genetically modified.
In a very limited way, and we have a good reason, okay?
And somehow we've convinced everybody else to think the same way we do about genetically modified people because we're part of a
Yeah.
Starfleet that comprises a lot of different civilizations. And we like everybody unless you've been genetically modified or enhanced,
Right.
in which case, no, we're going to treat you like second-class citizens.
Yeah.
Do I have a problem with that, with my perfect little Starfleet? Of course I do. Of course I do. And the way it was framed, and I mentioned this to Steve, that when this came up in Deep Space Nine, in regards to Julian Bashir, in which they said, hey, genetically modified people are against the law, I went, okay, so what? And then they explained Julian was falling behind. He was slow. His parents wanted him to not have to, and he realized that he wasn't like everybody else. And so they take him to a doctor and they modified him and he turned out to be super great. He's super great, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Unfortunately, not everybody's super great because then they provided examples of what happens to other people who are
Right.
modified where that has caused significant problems. In this case, we're now expanding that to an entire race of people, right? An entire planet full of people that are being discriminated against, and that discrimination is being supported by Starfleet,
Right.
right? And so my canon part of me is like, Starfleet wouldn't allow this to happen. It would not let this, not my Starfleet. My Starfleet would not allow this to happen. But I allowed it to happen because the show is talking about bigger things. And that's what the show,
Yes.
when it's really good, that's what the show is about. Other stuff, not canon bullshit.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And so, just like when they brought it up, is it fair for Julian Bashir to be punished because of something his parents did? No, of course not. So he got to stay in Starfleet. That was kind of the point, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the laws are there in place because we all really got really close to being completely and totally destroyed during the eugenics wars. And so that's fine. Okay, that works. Great. I don't need it. I'm a stickler for canon, but this doesn't upset too many things as far as I'm concerned. It does expand that, give it more of a wrinkle. It gives me a little bit more of, hey, Starfleet wasn't perfect when it first started.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm okay with that too. I'm okay with the idea that Starfleet just was birthed fully formed and it was
Right. And it was an
absolutely
ideal
wonderful.
utopian thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and then because Kirk wasn't on the stand, they had to make up a whole bunch of shit that Robert April did that violated the Prime
Which
Directive.
I thought was a funny little, she's giving you descriptions of not existent Star Trek episodes, which I thought
Yep,
was hilarious. It's like,
yep.
remember in 2248 when you went to a planet, and she's describing things that could easily be TV guide summaries of Star Trek episodes.
And could
And
easily
I
have
thought
been
that was
Kirk's
fantastic.
Enterprise or anybody's
Yeah,
Enterprise
I thought that was fantastic.
because they bend and break the rules all the time. Even
Yes.
Picard did. So
Oh yeah, all the time. Yeah.
He didn't like it, but of course he did.
He pretended not to like it.
And
then he got back to his room and he was like,
don't even get me started on my favorite captain. Because Cisco, it's more of a guidebook.
It's a suggestion. Yeah. Cisco would actually go out of his way to look for an excuse to violate the Prime Directive. I think like there were scenes we didn't get to see where Kira, who wasn't even in Starfleet, would have to pull him aside and go, "You're really reaching on this one, man." Like
there's an episode when he's trying to get what's his name in the Maquis, and they're looking at each other going, "Okay, I guess we're gonna do this thing."
It's one of my favorite moments from Deep Space Nine. Where in that episode with Eddington, when Cisco gives the order to launch the torpedo to poison the planet, and Worf does a double take, and I'm like, you fucked up when Worf is like, "Are we sure we want to launch this torpedo?" Worf is like, "I don't know if this is a good idea, boss," and Cisco has to look at Worf and say, "Did I stutter? Fired a torpedo, poison the planet, do it," and Worf's like, "Okay."
It was nice of them to have a whole episode of people sitting down talking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
or
almost literally, that's all it was.
Or standing talking. Yeah. Because while I do enjoy the pew pew and I do enjoy the fights and that's all that, that stuff, I don't need it in order for it to be Star Trek. I prefer the ones where they got, that's a balance. There are talky episodes and there are punchy episodes and there are funny episodes, and this one was the talky episode, where they get a chance to talk about something that, we're dealing with kind of now. And, it applies to our society right now, because that's what, as far as I'm concerned, good science fiction, that's what it's about, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're not really going to be able to apply anything you find in Star Wars to what's going on here. Star Wars is an adventure story, right? There's no allegory there.
Well, not as explicit of one. I mean, you can always go with the rebels versus fascists thing, but I mean, there's not as explicit.
It's just fucking made up bullshit. It's nothing there. I'm sorry, it's just made up bullshit.
I mean,
they're want it to be in there, I guess you could put it in there.
They are called stormtroopers, which is also what Nazis were called. But anyway,
they are called stormtroopers. But did we need 9 movies to tell us that fascism is bad? No, we already.
Well, some of us apparently need a few more than 9 movies. They still haven't gotten the message, but no, I do agree with you. I mean, Star Trek has always been Star Trek is the Twilight Zone in space.
Yeah, sometimes.
Not always, but a lot of the times. Mm-hmm. And this with other than having like a freaky twist at the end, like this is one of those episodes where it's obvious that yes, this is about number one and what happens to her, but it's also about something deeper and something that has relevance to those of us who are watching it and to our society. And that's something that Star Trek has always done, and it's always been very good at it. And I always appreciate it when Star Trek does that.
Yeah. So I liked it. I liked it. I thought it was good. It was refreshing to have a sit down and argue about something episode.
Yeah, I agree.
And what do you think?
Same thing. I thought it was fantastic. The sitting down and talking episode, like I know some people, I think some people like those episodes even more than I do. Some people don't like them. Some people want there to be more, they always want there to be more action and more adventure. But like you said, I think there needs to be a balance. I don't think
when
every
you only
episode
have 10 episodes a season. I'm glad that this is in season 2. Because if they had done one in season 1, one of the prerequisites, I think, for a show like this is that you have to know the characters in order for this to have impact.
Yes. Well, and remember, I think, I can't remember. I think Captain Kirk's trial episode was in the first season. It might have been the second season.
Okay, so it wasn't Kirk. It wasn't Kirk's trial. It was Spock's trial. And that was largely due to doing something with the menagerie.
The menagerie was Spock's court-martial,
yeah.
But like Kirk's trial wound up kind of being a murder mystery. Like it didn't, it didn't hang on whether or not we cared about what happened to the characters. It was more sort of plot driven. This, like, especially the end when Pike gives Una a hug and says, welcome back. Like, if you don't care about those characters, that's not going to land the way it needs to.
It doesn't mean what it means. And it doesn't land the same way.
But if you care and you're like, oh, she's back, and Pike is happy that she's back, and, you know, like, and you can tell that they're really friends and they really care about each other, then it hits the way it needs to hit. And you're right. If this had been like the second episode, you know, of,
we would be like, who are these people?
One,
why do we? Yeah,
like, well, that's nice for them, but why do we care? But now we've seen enough. And here's the extraordinary thing. This is only the 12th episode of this series.
I know.
And we're already there with these characters where it's like, oh, I buy this. I believe that these are real people who care about each other. And as I've said many times, that's a big deal for me. Like, that's how I know that I really like a show, is when I've gotten to the point with it where I believe, oh, these people really care about each other. And after 12 episodes, we're there with Strange New Worlds, where I'm like, yep, you know, it's just like Cisco and Dax. It's just like Kirk and Spock, you know, it's like Geordi and Data. I get it. They're really friends. They really care about each other. I completely buy it.
Yeah.
The sitting around and talking thing, though, what I like about it is it reminds me of where Star Trek comes from. And even though Strange New Worlds has a much bigger budget and it can have a larger scope, than like the original series in the 60s, they do an episode like this, and it reminds you that Star Trek comes from TV, and TV, to a large extent, especially like dramatic TV, comes from theater. It doesn't so much come from movies, it comes from theater. And especially like if you watch early TV from the 50s, when they would have like live dramas like Studio 60 and Playhouse 90, it was basically plays on TV. So it comes from theater and people sitting around having conversations, or the drama coming from people talking to each other on stage. Like, that's theater. And this really feels like a theater episode. You know, there's if you wanted to do this episode we just watched on stage, you wouldn't have to adapt very much of it. You know what I mean? There's really nothing that wouldn't work on stage, because every major scene is characters talking.
Yeah.
And I like that about it, because it touches back to its roots. And I think those roots are important. And I love a lot of that early TV where it's very stagey and it's very, you know, theatrical in that way. And I love that about it. I like the fact that they went to the trouble of adding a little extra mystery to it by having the runner of, you know, La'an. First, it seems like La'an is trying to find out who snitched number one. Then it turns out that actually she's afraid she might have accidentally snitched number one. And then it turns out, no, she didn't do it. It was actually number one herself that did it. So like that, they add just a little extra subplot that ties into the main plot, that gets a satisfying, meaningful resolution before the end, and just gives it another layer, you know, an extra layer of tension and drama. And I really like that. And yeah, I mean, it ends pretty much the only way it could have ended, unless they wanted to just completely rewrite canon, which, despite how some fanboys have complained about the new Star Trek shows, they haven't really shown a willingness to do that. Like, they have changed things in terms of style and presentation, and they've changed aesthetic things, and they've made a few little tweaks to things here and there, but none of these new shows have shown any willingness to just flat out retcon major things from the canon. So we know that Dr. Bashir still has his issue like 100 years from now in Deep Space Nine. So they couldn't, unless they wanted to just completely rewrite canon, they couldn't have number one have her case resolved by Starfleet saying, you know what, you're right, we were completely wrong. Genetically engineered people can serve openly. It's all good, you know, because that would contradict Deep Space Nine.
Disrupt canon, yeah.
Yeah. So it ended the only way it could have ended, which is number one gets off the hook and gets to come back to work, and and basically they make an exception.
Yeah.
But they get there in a really interesting and a really satisfying way, and in a way where it's number one's lawyer forcing Starfleet to live up to its ideals, even when it doesn't really want to. which I think is a really interesting way to go. It's like, look, your own law says you are better than this, and you need to, you need to rule in a certain way if you want Starfleet to even have any hope of standing for what you think it stands for and for what she thinks it stands for. And they say, okay, that's what we're going to do. And I thought that was really well done. I'm not as attached to Starfleet being good as you are. I get it. Like I completely get it. And I get misty eyed when Starfleet captains give their soaring speeches about how much Starfleet means to them just as much as anybody. But ultimately, Starfleet doesn't exist so that we can watch Star Trek and go, oh, isn't Starfleet great? Starfleet exists as a metaphor. Starfleet and the Federation, and they're kind of used interchangeably, exists as a metaphor for us, specifically for the United States, but for humanity in general.
I think for both of us, I think this butt heads with both of us disagree with Gene Roddenberry when it came to, hey, there's nothing wrong with Starfleet. Everything's great.
It's always someone else. Yeah.
We've settled our shit. And so whenever these kinds of shows came up, it was always some alien civilization that was fucked up and stupid.
Yeah.
Right. It was never, something internal. And once Gene had died, people got away from it.
Yeah.
It was one of the reasons why a lot of people don't like the first 3 seasons of The Next Generation, is because he had put his foot down.
That, no conflict among the crew and
But as story writers, as both you and I are both writers, we know how limiting that can be. And that also, I think, it contributes to the idea that some people will watch Star Trek and then come away with a very conservative idea of Star Trek because it's always the others that are doing that. They're,
our society is perfect and we fixed all our problems, and it's always those other guys that Well, and what I like about the more, let's say, the post Roddenberry versions of Starfleet and the Federation that we've seen in the various shows and movies since then, you can still say, oh, hey, they've solved a lot of our problems. Like, I think based on the glimpses of the Federation that we see in Star Trek, especially Earth, but the Federation in general, I mean, they do seem like they're a lot better off than we are. You know what I mean? It seems like they have fixed a lot. Like there's no poverty, there's no war. At least there's no internal war. There's still war with other people.
Earth is a paradise. Remember, we keep getting told that.
Earth is peaceful. Earth is prosperous. It doesn't seem like there's any, at least no serious like racism or institutional discrimination or anything. Like they have improved their society from where we are immensely. So you don't lose that utopian angle. You just admit that even with all the progress they've made, they're still not perfect. They still have problems. They're still susceptible to the same prejudices that we deal with, just targeted at different things. But they still have to be, mindful of the same things that we ought to be being mindful of. And they need to be aware of their prejudices and their biases, and when they're jumping to conclusions, and when maybe they're acting out of fear instead of acting out of compassion. They deal with all the same shit that we do. They've just gotten a lot further along in their progress than we have. And I think that's, not only do I think that's better storytelling, it's a hell of a lot easier to do social commentary that feels relevant, that like you said, people will watch it and they'll realize, oh, they're talking about us. They're talking about things that we need to worry about, instead of, oh, wouldn't it be a shame if we were like that? Good thing we're not like those people over there. So I think the post Roddenberry version of Starfleet and Federation is a lot better.
The warp episode of Star Trek, of The Next Generation, right? There's a system, and it turns out that traveling at warp speed is detrimental to their system. And Geordi puts up, and he's going to fight the good fight, and we discovered all this stuff, and it ends with Starfleet saying, "Okay, we're not banning warp, but you can still go. We'll lower it a little bit.
We're going to set a speed limit, and that'll fix it."
And Geordi doesn't quit, but he's obviously disappointed, right? That's a more interesting story.
Yes.
than we showed up and there's this government and they're refusing to limit warp drive and it's bad and they're bad and they're not going to do it. Well, they're bad, but we're still good because we're great and we leave and we're still awesome. And it's more interesting when Sisko betrays what he believes in to get the Romulans to fight.
Yeah, when they put the character in an impossible situation where they can abide by their ideals and really awful things are going to happen, or they can violate their ideals and maybe cause something better to happen. And it's like, well, what do you do? Do you take the risk? You know, like Garrick says at the end of that episode, is it worth the self-respect of one Starfleet officer?
Was the integrity? What was it? One spy, one Romulan ambassador, and the integrity of one Starfleet
captain. Yeah, and I'd call that a bargain. And it's a much more interesting story dramatically, and it's a much more interesting story in terms of the allegory and in terms of the application to real life. Just like this, you know, like, there wouldn't be a story for this episode if we just treat Starfleet like it's morally perfect and they have solved all their problems. Well, then we don't get this episode. And this is a really good episode.
Yeah, it is.
You know, and it has things to, not only is it a good episode in terms of just on the surface level of its characters and its plot and everything, it has very relevant things to say about things that are going on, about many different things that are of similar nature that are going on in our society right now. And, you know, again, that's what Star Trek is for.
Yeah.
That's something that we agree with Roddenberry on, because he explicitly wanted it to be that. That was part of his vision.
The only place that it really doesn't carry over is into the movies.
Because no, not for the most part. There are a few of the movies are political, but
when they did, boy, oh boy, was it? I mean, the most in the film, Star Trek 4 was the one where they just said it out loud.
Star Trek 4 was the environmentalist movie. Star Trek 6 was the Cold War, the end of the Cold War allegory, and really the only other one that had like really clear political messaging, and not even for the entire movie, just for certain parts of it, was Into Darkness with the conflict between Kirk and Starfleet over whether or not to use the missiles, you know, to basically extrajudicially execute Khan after he escaped, you know, and that didn't wind up being what the whole movie was about, but that was a part of it.
Darkness.
I know, but for people who complain that the movies don't have as much political commentary, I mean, that is in that movie, and it's very obvious.
Yes, it is.
Doesn't wind up being what the movie's about, but it's part of it, and I did appreciate that. But yeah, you're right. Overall, the movies are not nearly as full of social commentary as the shows have been.
I think it's just the nature of the movies.
Yeah,
that's hard. That's a hard thing to pull off. You know, when you have an hour and a half or 2 hour movie.
Yeah.
Right. So, but I think bottom line, we both like this. We both like this episode.
Excellent episode. Absolutely. So
without Pike in it, the whole show falls apart. Pike, and he's not even doing that much in this episode. You know, he's there.
Pike's participation in this episode is pretty limited, but he's so good in every scene he's in.
I mean, basically,
he's so good.
The whole crew watches a courtroom drama on a TV.
They watch an episode of Matlock starring one of their friends. We have I wonder if Matlock's going to win.
We have a couple of crew members that want to do a thing, but turns out that it's a violation of their integrity, and so they don't do it.
That's right. Yeah. Oh, that's right. We didn't mention that. Yeah. La'an asks Uhura to, you know, dig into people's personal logs. And Uhura's like, no.
I'm not gonna do it.
I'm not doing that. Yeah. But yeah, really good episode.
Yeah. Okay, good.
So, yeah. All right. So we both liked it.
Now, fingers crossed, they're exploring the galaxy again next week.
Yeah.
They find some fucked up aliens and some fucked up things happen. Or maybe some funny things happen. Or maybe
some funny things happen. Yeah. Maybe, you know, like Spock falls into a bush and comes up and his face is full of polka dots.
Okay, that might be funny.
I'm just, you know.
We seem to have forgotten that he's engaged.
I think Spock has forgotten that he's engaged.
What I'm hoping that doesn't show up is that Spock's, adopted brother doesn't show up again. I don't want that happening.
I hope Cybok shows up and sleeps with Nurse Chapel. I hope it becomes Days of Our Spock.
I don't want that. I don't want it to become a soap opera.
General Starship.
I hope that the escape of Cybok and all that stuff doesn't become a thing. And if it does become a thing, I hope it's limited to one episode.
I would expect it to be limited. And that, that's another thing. Speaking of they set up the, we might be going to war with the Gorn at the end of episode, at the end of last week. That was not mentioned at all in this episode, which because I was kind of because that's how they did things last year. And I was kind of hoping that's what that was going to be for this season, is they plant a seed in the first episode. And then a few episodes go by where that just isn't brought up, or maybe it's like referenced very briefly, and then it comes in at some point later.
We're so limited by how much information we can get about the Gorn, right? That I don't know. Because my hopes would be we get geared up for a war with Gorn, and then we go, no, we're not doing it. And there are Starfleety reasons why we're not going to do it. Because while they may seem like monsters and the way they reproduce is horrible and all this other stuff, there's something behind us recognizing that maybe we shouldn't go to war with the Gorn. Mm-hmm. And it's not for like, we'll lose or something like that. It's got to be like,
we can't go to war, they'll kick our ass.
I hope it's for a philosophical, moral reason that we don't do it.
Yeah.
Then, they're the new monsters, and we got to kill the monsters because we kill monsters here. That's what Starfleet is about.
Galactic monsters and how to destroy them.
Well, don't they fly in space and have a society and have a right to exist? No.
We have to kill them all.
We have to kill the monsters because we don't like them. They're icky. I've always wondered how Starfleet would react to, say, these xenomorphs from Aliens.
Oh, my God.
Because they're not intelligent per se, right? They're just drones. They have a queen that I guess commands them around. I don't know if the queen is necessarily considered intelligent, but when they first encounter them, do you think Spock would try to mind meld with the queen, see what's going on?
He might, maybe. I mean, and then the queen would just eat him, and no more Spock.
Probably.
And he'd be like, "Yeah, real good job, Spock.
Good job, Spock.
Good job, Spock. God damn it."
I've always wondered how they would react to to other Star Trekky, or not Star Trekky, but I mean
other science fiction
stuff, right? It'd be like, well, would they lose against? I know, but Kirk would kill them all. Kirk would, after he lost Spock, that would be it.
He'd be like, okay. You'd have a fucking Rambo montage of him like putting a headband on and strapping like 15 different phasers on.
I mean, imagine Demon in the Dark, the classic Star Trek episode, except it's an alien queen guarding her eggs from the Aliens movie, and not the Horta who's crying pain and the the death of the children and
it's like, oh no, we got to kill this one.
No, you don't understand. They keep taking our guys away and laying eggs in their chests. We just
we got to get rid of it.
We have to kill them, all of
them. We got to get rid of it fast. Yeah. Well, we'll find out in future episodes.
Thanks, everybody.
We'll be back next week for episode 3.
Yay! Bye.
Let's keep it going. Bye, everybody.
Bye.